What is up, everyone? This will be our first video after Christmas. I'm Shane again from the Twin Sons Podcast, and today I want to talk to you real quick. I've been getting a lot of messages about Singleton. If you don't know, I've made a lot of Singleton decks. I've made, I think, 3 articles or 2 articles now of at least 10 to 15 different Singleton decks that I've taken into the Gauntlet. And that was over at runeterraccg.com, so make sure to check those articles out. But today and this whole weekend, I've been getting a lot of text, a lot of Discord messages and Twitter messages about, hey, do we have any new decks for Cosmic Creation since that dropped? And I haven't really gotten the chance to write a new article, although I can tease now that one will be coming out with 5 whole new decks in 2 weeks from now for the next Singleton Gauntlet. But for this first Singleton Gauntlet here, what I did is I just updated my favorite deck, and I had written and made a video about this before. It's a Bilgewater Noxus Freljord deck, and it's all about like real strong consistency and a really heavy mid-range game. But, you know, there are some new really solid cards in those regions, so we added a few in there. I'm going to talk you through some of the changes I made, why this deck building in Singleton is so focused on consistency for me and just access to, you know, Nexus damage and things like that. And, you know, just talk about the format a little bit in general. Obviously share the deck code and let you guys jump into this gauntlet. And now I do apologize, it's a little bit late. We did have the Christmas holiday happen and a pretty busy weekend all around, but you still have a couple days left to get your Singleton in, so if you are waiting for this list, like I know a few people have been, here it is. This is what I did, and I just ran it and went a quick 7-0 this morning, so it felt really solid. So let's jump on over, and I'll break it down a little bit here. So realistically, it's a, like I said, Bilgewater Freljord Noxus deck, and previously we had our champions be Draven, Gangplank, Swain, Trundle, and Sejuani, and Twisted Fate. So here I replaced the Twisted Fate with a Riven. Riven is super solid. She's another 3-drop, so I wanted to keep someone else early here. She's got the Reforge mechanic, so every time she's going to start a turn, she's going to generate a card, as well as Draven generating a card on his 3-drop. You have a lot of value here between these two champions, and I think she really fits into the theme of this deck, and that theme is just mid-range powerhouse units that are really hard to get off the board, so you can push some damage through, and then once you get that little bit of damage through, close out with some key important overwhelm units and other things at the top end. So if you know, I'll go through the deck a little bit. I'm not just going to read off the whole list, but I'll talk about some of the consistencies, what we're looking for here, and things like that. That was the main change that I made, and obviously you can go back and look at the other deck as well. There are a few other cards that I added from the new cards. I did add Weapon Hilt. I think it's a better combat trick than I gave it credit for, just in the sense that you will get 2 cards out of it, always for 2. You know, obviously the Reforge mechanic that you're going to get isn't going to be anything of, you know, extreme importance, like when you compare this to Pale Cascades and you get to draw a card, but the value is still there, so I did add that as well, and that might be the only 2 new cards that actually made the list, but there were some other changes early on, specifically for certain matchups. So, just to talk about, you know, what we're looking for as far as 1-drops, getting some damage through early is always good, so we are running the Precious Pet and the Saboteur. Also, Draven's Biggest Fan is really important because he will let us hit our 3-drop very consistently if we do see the Biggest Fan. He's very good, and you'll see that consistency that I talk about where you have tutoring cards, so cards that search out things like Draven's Biggest Fan. We have that in Entreat, the Biggest Fan himself. We also have that as we get deeper down. We have the Babbling Berg, who can only hit specific cards in our deck, including the Hearthguard, Gangplank, Sejuani, Ancient Yeti, Farron, Leviathan, or not the Dreadway unless he got buffed. But on top of that, then we have the Leviathan and the Dreadway as well. You could run the Taskmaster thing as well, the boat Tusk Rider, I think that's what it's called. I always forget this name, the Tusk Raider. So that boat to draw Sejuani, but it's not as important as the Leviathan and the Dreadway. They're both super strong for finishing. And so that's where the consistency will come. And then in that mid-range and early game, like I said, we just want thick units that have a lot of board presence, and a decent amount of draw always helps as well. So Sentry and Croaker work. And then we have just decent bodies here. When we get to 3-drops, we have a lot of our removal spells like Calling Strike and Death's Hand, and then we just have really good bodies. Another card that I added was Scorched Earth, so I was worried about Grand Plaza. Obviously, it's a pretty annoying card, as well as, you know, Go Hard is not a problem in Singleton because you can't run 3 of them, so that's not going to be a thing, but Grand Plaza is the big thing on the ladder right now, and I did run into like 2 to 3 Grand Plaza decks. So I was contemplating even putting an additional removal for landmarks, but Scorched Earth I think is the best one in these 3 regions by far. So I went with Scorched Earth here, and I did get to remove 2 plazas with it. So it is super important to have. They're not going to guarantee hit their plaza, but beyond plaza, Howling Abyss is super strong. So that's one of the big changes that I added. And this was in a later version of the deck, so depending on what deck you saw, I did have Scorched Earth in a later version of it, but if you see the original, it didn't have Scorched Earth. To also go hand in hand with that plaza, Icevale Archer is a super strong counter, right? They play plaza on 3, then they play their 4-drop, you just freeze their 4-drop, so they become immobilized. So super strong 2-drop. Even though we're not trying to stall a whole lot here, still really helps in certain situations. Once we get past that 3 mark, we're getting into the the 4 mark. We have Avalanche, which saved me a game completely against a Grand Plaza deck that was running Lucian and had a bunch of just units real quick, and I got to Avalanche essentially 4 units off their board while only dealing 2 damage to 1 unit I had out who still lived through it. Super important to have a little bit of board clear early because things can get out of hand. And after that, once we get into the 5 to 6 to 7 range, that's where we love. That's where we live. We hang out in there all day. We have a ton of value. Hearthguard just makes that value increase as we go, and a lot of decks don't have strong removal to handle that. Gangplank is just a nuts 5-drop. Swain is really thick. Trundle, even with the nerf, he's still good. I did consider dropping him instead of Twisted Fate, so you could do that if Twisted Fate's more up your alley, but I think Trundle's too good still in terms of value. It's just a card that generates another card, so just card generation when you can't maximize your draw by running things like 3 Pale Cascade is immensely important in Singleton. Past that, Ancient Yeti helps a ton to get early game damage through, and Captain Farron and Leviathan, but mainly Captain Farron, are the MVPs of the deck. They're 100% what we're going to try to close the game with, and that's what you want to do. You want to play Farron, you get a big Overwhelm attack, and you try to close the game out. We have a couple different units with Overwhelm. These 4 right here is including Leveled Trundle and even Gangplank as well. But we do have a little bit of the Reforge mechanic early, which we can use to give additional attack on our Overwhelm units, or even give Overwhelm to a unit like Swain is really important as well. So it's another slight win condition. And that's the deck. It's really good into like literally everything. It feels really, really solid. You have plenty of little combat tricks early, including Brittle Steel to just get a really important early trade, Shared Spoils to get more cards, Troll Chant to get 2 positive trades, Culling Strike to remove an annoying Zoe, Death's Hand to remove an annoying Zoe, because Zoe's really solid for Singleton as well. So I saw her, I think, 3 times. But yeah, like I said, it just got a lot of combat tricks, a lot of stability in the mid game, and then you just close out late. Things can get out of hand if they do hit a lot of their strong removal that they really need. They can quickly get to a point where it is rough, and that mainly is Shadow Isles removal, like Vengeance or Ruination. We don't have a ton of counterplay for Ruination other than ideally having enough hand value in our pocket. But if we don't have that, Ruination is going to stop us in our tracks. But remember, it's Singleton, so they can only run 1. Other than that, I mean, rush decks, we're not too worried. We don't have a whole lot of healing, but we can really compete early with our units. We can consistently put a decent amount of units on board to stop some nonsense, and it really helps. Mid-range decks, man, this thing goes hand in hand with any mid-range deck. I'm confident I'd put this against any other mid-range deck out there and feel great about it. Even if they're going the elusive route, we have enough removal, some challenger, some vulnerable with Hired Gun, and the Ice Pillar. We can handle even elusives or anything like that. But the biggest weakness would be if a control deck really hits what it needs. That I think is the number one weakness, but it doesn't happen often. I played a couple of different control decks today, and none of them could handle this mid-range push here that that just really push the damage through. Farron, Leviathan, they just finish off decks on turn 8, on turn 9, and they can't. By the time they put their mana in to try to stabilize, it's too far gone with how strong our early game is. Here's the curve here as well. Really important to stick to a curve that looks like this, especially with the units that we have that are drawing other cards. We want to keep this type of level here because it does really, really help hit consistently good curves. Even if we're not hitting the same units, because we can't guarantee that with Singleton, we are still hitting things that are going to function very similar. And you don't get trapped into a lot of situations where your Croaker has to hit a 1 health thing or anything like that, because he's not coming up that consistently with our 1-drops. And we also run 2 1-drops with 2 health. So there's not a whole lot of really awkward situations. And if you can limit awkward situations in a mode where you have to run 40 different cards, and by eliminating some of those awkward situations and maximizing on the consistency of just hitting a solid curve, really strong units, good combat tricks, you're going to win a lot of games. And this is what this deck does. I've entered 4 Singletons with it and won all 4. It's lost 1 game out of those 4 Singletons. So it's super solid. Singleton's an absolute blast. Hopefully you guys enjoy the deck. Hopefully you take it out and give it a nice shot. We can talk about, mulligan tips for real quick. We talked about matchups. Mulligan tips is pretty straightforward. You don't really want anything late other than really the Ancient Yeti. Early, you definitely want a 1-drop, a 2-drop, and a 3-drop. And then after that, it's really up to you. Any of these cards are solid. You don't really want your combat tricks unless you have units, but any of the units are really good. Starting with a 2-2 body is fantastic, an Omen Hawk, Pet, a Saboteur, Draven's biggest fan. All that's really, really solid. And then even 2-drops, all of them are really strong to start with as well. And our 3-drops, just as much. All of them are really solid to start with. So you can really just pick any starting units, and your deck should naturally figure out a solid curve as you go. You're going to be drawing a card each turn. You have a solid curve to play, and hopefully these cards are generating some other value as you go. And then it's like you're playing an expedition game, right? You're just trying to maximize your board value as you go. That's all you're doing. As far as flex cards, let's talk flex cards for a second, because there are so many card options what you have in here. Like I said, for champions, 100% MF deserves a spot. Twisted Fate deserves a spot. Darius deserves a spot. Tryndamere definitely deserves a spot. And even Vlad could deserve a spot. We can't run all of them. I think Draven and Riven are both too solid early. And MF is really good as well. But they both have just a solid hand generation that they're getting. Riven can block very well at a 3-4. And then they just push through a lot of value. It's really, really strong. In the 5 range, you could even run Ashe as well, but I don't think any of these can just compete with the pure value you're getting. 3 of the 4 of these have Overwhelm, and Swain actually levels a decent amount. We have a decent amount of spells that deal some damage as well as some self-harm units. So Swain can level, and then he's just a thick body as well. I mean, Swain and Trundle are on the fence, but I don't think any of the other ones outweigh it. The only one that I could think that could possibly, and I think would be in the lead, would be Tryndamere, just because of the level up effect where you can avoid something like a Ruination. Early on, you could definitely put in more 1-drops if you're feeling like you need them. You probably don't need them to be realistic, but they do help if you have them. 2-drop wise, I used to run Dreadway and Make It Rain. That's both out because I don't think Make It Rain really makes the cut at 3 mana anymore, but you could if you really want to, if you're really worried about, mass removal like that. House Spider is a super solid 2 you could put in. I even thought about the Rune Weaver. I know 1 health is not that great, but you can't run that many pings, and she's making a fragment. So she really might deserve a spot fully in this deck over one of these 2-drops. But, she's not in at the moment. She definitely could fit into it at any point. Get down to 3. I think things like Jarl Hunters are really good just because, again, it's just a card that generates hand value. You don't have a lot of draw in Singleton, so I think something like that is really good. As well as Fervor for a damning, like a finishing move. Fervor's great. Might's great, but we have enough units with naturally printed Overwhelm where it doesn't have as much value. And Guillotine's okay if we were running the Make It Rain package again. You can kind of go into that range where you actually want to start picking things off. But we don't normally ping things up too much. We kind of just start being the aggressor. Sharpen Resolve could deserve a spot. It's only a temporary buff, but it's a big trade value buff there that you could get. And then as you get further down, there's not nearly as much that I find super interesting. You could naturally run Decimate or Decisive Maneuver for more finishing power, or Jack the Winner or Kato. But these cards are kind of, Kato and Jack the Winner, you kind of require you to have a decent board setup before they're super useful. And if they are removing your board, they don't become as useful. I want all these units to just naturally be able to push damage through, and that's kind of what we have right now. And yeah, I think that's pretty much where I'd keep it. There's not a whole lot down in this region that isn't in that I think deserves a spot. I will, roughly say real quick, Riptide Rex wasn't it before. He did get nerfed, and I think Farron and Leviathan do a lot more than him right now, so he's out. Howling Abyss, you could put it in there, but I think losing the power of 7 mana on a turn actually is going to put you too far behind by the time you get the value back, and it's a little too RNG for this. We just want to be consistently smacking face. So the other card that could really go in, this will be the last reference, is Battle Fury. 100% you could slot this in, drop it on an Overwhelm unit. They probably won't have a removal or a freeze, and it's 8+ damage. Super, super good card. And of course, guess you could run Feel the Rush, but I don't think it's needed in this deck. We don't want our hand to get clogged. We want to just be able to consistently drop a ton of damage through. So that's the deck, guys. Singleton is a blast. You can expect an article in a couple weeks with 5 decks. I'll probably update 5 different decks with Cosmic Creation cards. Maybe sprinkle in 1 or 2 of those decks just to be brand new as well. Shout out to my wife and friends. They hooked it up with the setup, so we have a lot more going on. So we're making a lot more content. We have a lot of quality stuff here that they all gave us. So I appreciate all the new subscribers as well to the channel. Welcome in. Appreciate your support. If you guys enjoyed the video, just leave a like, leave a comment. Tell us what we can do better. Tell us what else you want to see. And, hopefully you enjoy Singleton a little bit as well. And if you don't feel like deck building, I got you covered. I'll be building Singleton decks all the time. So, guys, thanks for checking it out, and I'll see you next time.